and neither do the secular, or God, I hate the word. I'm a secularist. The the John Dominic Cursons of the world, or the, I don't know what I should call them, the History Channel scholars, basically. The History Channel scholars want to put a late date on it because they don't like it either. The Apocalypse of Peter, 120 to 150. Okay, that works. But okay, we get these writings that show up in the canon, which are the earliest, which people want to find something earlier, but they're not. They have not yet. And everything that they find fits into this framework pretty well, of who came before who. And then you get things like you get Ignatius of Antioch and Didache, which come at a weird time. And then you get things like, and you have, around the time you have the fragments Pius, you have First Clement. First Clement is using Hebrews and stuff like that, and that was written 80 to 98. So that should tell you where, I mean, if somebody is quoting a work that's trying to sound like Paul, that's from at least, it has to be at least 20 years before that, so 80, 60. Paul is before 60. And then you get things popping up after this kind of weird intermittent period where you have these martyrologies. You get Irenaeus of Lyon, Tertullian, Origen, these writers, these big guys, these heavy hitters, basically. Clement of Alexandria, who's one of the best. Although Irenaeus is my guy, I love that guy. I love his writing. So, and they're talking about these heretics. Well, the heretics had to come before them. Marcion, Basilides, Valentinus, and all of their spurious works, the Apocryphon of James, the Apocryphon of James, Cerinthus, you have, and you have all these Docetic, works being written before then or during then, and you have people like Clement of Alexandria talking about how they hate sex and they're basically perverted in their own abstinence through their hatred of sex. So you try to sort this out, and it looks like people getting a hold of parts of the teachings of Christianity and then going off on a limb, trying to apply it to Neoplatonists and all these weird Greek views. They try to almost weave in the mystery religions here. But then you have historical stuff that's not even Christian, that's like anti-Christian from the early 100s, 110, 115, 108, from Pliny and Tacitus, and even Suetonius. I'm talking, referencing stuff that's earlier. And then you have things like Josephus. And again, yes, there's a part where a Christian scribe inserted into Josephus something that was already talking about Jesus, but we know what was added in, and it's very obvious. So when people say, oh, everything about Jesus was added in Josephus, no scholar believes that. And anyone that tries to say, oh, this is it, has never been able to defend his ground. And then just the weird stuff with the Acts of Peter and saying Peter got crucified upside down. I never believed that he was ever in Rome or crucified upside down. I thought that was stupid. I don't think... I thought Simon Magus was just a literary or just a catch-all bad guy, the boogeyman, basically, for the post-apostolic age. But then you have things in the Gospels that are alluding to the fact that he got crucified upside down. And this seems to be common knowledge. And how the hell did Peter get to Rome? When did he go to Rome? There seems to be a very, very strong tradition that he went to Rome. But to me, it's very odd and doesn't seem right. But it also doesn't seem right that he wouldn't be in Rome. There's some weird stuff going on. And then you have people who can't deal with the subject maturely and try to say, oh, basically the first century didn't exist. I mean, it's just upside down weirdness. And then you'll get the people who are not, I mean, these people are not even pseudo-intellectuals. They're just praying asses that try to say Jesus didn't exist. And then you get people like that dude Zoroaster, not the actual prophet of the Aryans, Zoroaster, but the guy who was on here saying Markian, and who is an idiot and tries to, I mean, what, are you taking acid? Basically, he's inverting everything Tertullian said. He's saying Tertullian's lying and making a straw man, so we're going to invert Tertullian, and that's how we can find out what Marcion said, which makes no sense. But of the early stuff of what came, I mean, at least they group Timothy, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, and Titus together at between 100 and 150. Now, at least they group them together. Of those dates, no. Because they came on the heels of Paul. People want to say they weren't written by Paul. Fine, I get it. I understand why. I totally understand why you'd say that. I go back and forth on that as well. In fact, I'd actually rather have them not written by Paul, but of the Pauline community, although it's fine, Paul could have written those. But 100, putting that at 100, I mean, that's like saying, well, we don't, in the ancient world, we don't hear about this until 105, so we're going to put the writing at 100. Well, do you think that person's actually reading the first copy ever of that? And then you have a slew of people mentioning it right after this person, who obviously aren't copying off of that person. There's basically a manuscript timeline that has to occur for that, even for divergent translations to occur. This is how it's, when people question datings of things, or why do we think it's that early? Why do even the most far-flung people who want everything in the New Testament very late, why do they have to put things at such an early date? Well, because you can't have a copy in Syriac and Latin and Greek and in Coptic in the, you know, in 120 AD and saying that, oh, the original was written in 110. It doesn't work like that, especially from a suppressed underground religion. And that's what this was. Like, it wasn't always suppressed. It was always suppressed. It wasn't always persecuted to slaughtering people, of rounding all the Christians up in the city and killing them. That wasn't continual, or else there wouldn't be any Christianity left. Although that did happen in constantly, that would repeat itself. Incidents like that, it was always suppressed up until Constantine. It wasn't always, you didn't always have the horrors of the Nero or Diocletian or Domitian or any of those guys. That wasn't continual. Or was Septimus Severus or Trajan. You didn't have, you know, not every emperor was so hell-bent on destroying the Christians. Anyways, they were kind of seen as an anomaly. Yeah, I mean, putting 2 Peter at 160. Now, even I'll say that's late. I'll put it at 120, but 160. That's, again, are people thinking that either the church fathers have a time machine, or that they're reading the first copy ever written? That's what some cases would have to be with this. Like Flavius Josephus, 93. Okay, that's a fixed date. 2 Thessalonians, 100, really? 180. And then they have hypothetical things in here. Lost sayings of Q. There are no lost, there's Q, but there's not lost sayings, as if it's a document. Lost sayings gospel. There was no gospel. The signs gospel. You mean John? Because yeah, 50 to 90. That's about the Gospel of John. But no, what do they have to do with the Gospel of John? Oh my God, where do they put it? 90 to 120. And get this, well, at least they have the Apocalypse of John 90 to 95, even though it was much earlier than that. They have the Gospel of John and all 3 epistles of John. 90 to 120. And guess what else they put from 90 to 120? The Epistle of Jude. If you're going to put the Epistle of Jude there, then you've got to back John up way back. Farther into the 1st century than that. Epistle of Jude, 90 to 120, that's actually an accurate date. Which right now I'm pissing off both extremes of the scholars, because I'm saying some of the stuff could not have been written by the apostles, and other stuff is, nobody disputes Paul's. That's what the seven undisputed of Paul. Nobody disputes that. And the fact that none of our gospels are pseudonymous. None of them have fake authorship to them. They're not. Simon Peter wrote this gospel. Oh, we know that Simon Peter didn't write that gospel. Not to mention of Mark, this really early primitive thing of primitive gospel. We have one of the earliest church fathers who only even just quotes of him survive, just scraps of his stuff survive. He says, Mark was written from the traditions of Peter. And you look at it and go, yeah, that actually seems exactly right. And which is weird because it's so primitive, yet there's some people who think it was written in Rome, which might lend some credence to this idea that Peter got to Rome at some point.